Hey everybody, Pastor Bill here. Just recording a quick video to say thank you for each of you who sent a kind word or an encouragement about this week's sermon. And it's just been a few days now, but I've heard so many stories that I wanted to record a follow-up video. Some of you said that you found freedom, a sense of hope, a sense that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, a sense that you don't have to be ashamed to admit that you have depression or that you have anxiety or that you're struggling, that you need someone to help you. And I think that's amazing. One person emailed me and said, in some churches it just feels like you can't talk that way because you should have the joy of the Lord and you're just weak if you don't. And I want to be very clear that, that's what Christianity is all about. It's about helping each other and having compassion for each other. And so it's okay to come as you are and to be completely honest about your state and how you feel. And what you should expect to find when you're honest like that is compassion, understanding, help, someone to carry your burden, someone to lift you up. One of the ways I want to do that in this follow-up video is just to share part of my story that I wanted to share during the sermon, but there's just a time limit and there's a certain sense where things just don't fit. I felt like it didn't fit, and it, with some other things, got thrown onto the cutting room floor. There's a lot of stuff that's edited out. But I wanted to record this video to share it because, based on the feedback I've received, a lot of you might enjoy hearing it. So I mentioned on stage that I'm one of the people who struggled with anxiety and depression. And if I'm honest with myself, that tense is not right. I'm someone who struggles with anxiety and depression in various shades of black and white and gray. And even in the days and weeks leading up to this sermon, I was in the gray. And I think part of that is so that God would have it fresh on my mind what it is like to experience depression, so that I could preach that sermon from a place of true empathy. And in the weeks leading up to that sermon, I walked through with others who were enduring the darkness. And that also God used to fill me up with empathy and compassion for people in all sorts of different circumstances. But I want to share a little bit about my story. Basically, I've had anxiety all my life, but I never was honest with myself until an acute circumstance brought it to the forefront. It may sound weird to some people, but I've always been anxious about doctors, procedures, infections, germs, hospitals. It's not just fear of needles, but it's deeper than that. And all of that came to the forefront a few years before we moved to Florida, when all my worst fears came true. And I talked about that situation in a previous sermon, so I'm not going to share the details again. You can go look up that sermon if you want. What I didn't share in that sermon is the psychological impact that had on me. So I ended up a guy who had never had an IV before, who went through 20-some years of life and never had blood drawn from a vein, who had never been put to sleep, who had never had stitches, and all of a sudden I was in the middle of everything I feared the worst. In the hospital, IVs, being put under for an operation. And what I didn't say earlier, that I will say now, is that in that time, I had to seek help because my anxiety rose to an acute level that I couldn't deal with. And so I went to a pastor friend, which is a great place to start, by the way, who let me cry on his shoulder, who listened to me, who gave me some good biblical advice over the course of about half an hour. And then he did the best thing he possibly could have done, which is said, I know a great Christian psychologist, and you should see her. And he gave me the number and made the referral. And I was brave enough to call and make an appointment and go. And I remember on my way in, the first appointment, there was a rainbow in the sky. And I'm not superstitious, or I don't try not to read things into just normal scientific occurrences. But I felt a sense of God saying, it's going to be okay. And I'm going to walk through this with you. And so I entered into this process of counseling, which took 3 years. During that process, I met with a psychiatrist as well, who prescribed different medications. We found a good SSRI that worked well, to allow my brain to calm down enough to do the work of counseling. Basically, the way my brain is wired, everyone is wired up differently, but my brain is wired up in an obsessive way. And so with OCD, the O is obsessive, and the obsession is when a thought gets in your head and it just spins around and around and around, and the gears of your brain kind of stop moving and don't go on to the next thing. And with me, with medical things, anything like a zit or any feeling of slight numbness or tingling or an idea would get stuck in those gears, and my brain would spiral downward and downward and downward through hypothetical situations, leading to horrible things like being intubated and being, I don't know, just crazy things. Well, the medication allowed that to calm down and kind of grease the wheels so that wouldn't happen. And it allowed me to go through the process of learning about my brain, learning about my cognitive structures, so to speak, my mind, how it works, and to come up with some strategies with my counselor to deal with when that happens. So we did things like reading books. I'm a good student, so I loved that, having an assignment, working on me. And the books were awesome. Journaling about them, also writing down things. For instance, writing my fears down. So when I had that fear that this tickle in my throat was me having an allergic reaction that meant I was going to have to go to the hospital and get intubated and get all this, I would write that down. And I would bring it with me when I met with her every other week. And I would look back on that list and I would be like, wow, none of these things happened. And things like that just broke the power of my anxiety and my fear. There were all sorts of exercises we went through like that. And it was a great experience. She was a Christian, but she was also a fully trained psychologist from the cognitive behavioral standpoint. And bringing the best of science with the best of theology was exactly what I needed. And needless to say, 3 years later, I was in a much better place. We were able to come off the medication, and I was able to use those strategies moving forward. And that's what it is today. It's like cancer. I'm in remission. I'm not cured because my brain is still wired that way. It's still prone to do the exact same thing. It's still prone to take something and hold on to it and spiral downward. But now I've learned what I can do and have some techniques. And so when people ask me about this mysterious thing called counseling or therapy or medication, I just want to share my story to demystify it and say how beneficial it's been to me and my life. And want to encourage anyone out there who is struggling and suffering in silence and assuming that there's no light at the end of the tunnel and this is just how it's going to be forever, that it doesn't have to be that way. Everybody's journey is different, but the important thing is that you open up to someone, like a pastor friend, who can listen to your story and help point you to the right path to be on. Scott and I are not licensed psychologists. We don't have all the training, but we can listen and we can point you in the right direction. And we would love to do that. My hope for our church is that no one continues to suffer needlessly under depression and anxiety, and especially under the shame of hiding it or feeling a burden that you can't share with someone else, because this is the church and you should be able to share it with someone else. And we all, every single one of us, your brothers and sisters, should listen to you and understand and have compassion on you. And that's what the church is all about. And I think Sunlight is that kind of place. So that's my encouragement. I hope in this follow-up video you just can further see that there really is hope, no matter what your situation is. And all you have to do is be brave enough to talk to someone and take the first step and trust Jesus to be with you every step that you take. The next step, the next step, the next step. And it won't happen overnight. It may not happen in a year, but over the course of time, things get better. And you may still have the same kind of brain you started with, but for the rest of your life, you're going to have strategies that can help you live a better life and function better and be happier and feel God's presence more and be able to serve Him more fully. So, again, we didn't have time to share all of that in the sermon, but I wanted to put it in this video for those of you who wanted to take the time to listen to it. And lastly, just a recent story. Almost nobody knows, but that problem I had 5-ish years ago reoccurred recently, and I was beside myself. And all the darkness from those years started coming back as I walked into a doctor's office, and they told me, "You have to have surgery. Here's the surgeon's card. Go make the appointment." And I was freaking out, but I knew what I had to do, and I talked to people. And I remember one person in particular who helped more than a lot of people. There's a lot of people who helped. But when I told Jason, our executive pastor, he simply said this: "I'll be with you through this." And that's exactly what I needed to hear. If you're someone who's watching this and you don't know how to respond to people who deal with these problems, that's what I needed to hear in that moment. Was I can't make it go away. I can pray for you. I can tell you the science behind it. I can tell you some Bible verses and some theological principles, but I knew all those things, and I did not want to hear those things. What I wanted to hear and what he said was, "I'll be there for you. You call me day or night. I'll come over to your house. We'll sit together, and we'll get through this." And that's what I needed. And that's what the church is supposed to be for one another. So I encourage you in that there are people just like him all around you in this church, people who will hold you up, people who will be there with you, and like I said in my sermon, point you to hope in the midst of trying times. When we're in the land of Hermon, so to speak, and when life isn't looking so grand, there are people all around you who will lift you up. So I hope this video has helped someone, and thanks again for listening.